You're sitting in a cave. It's 50,000 BC. You hunted this morning, you ate, and the sun is still high. You've got maybe 6 hours before it gets dark, and the things that want to eat you get noticeably more confident. And you have absolutely nothing to do. No phone, no book, no podcast, no group chat lighting up with 19 slightly different reactions to the same joke. Just you, a rock, and the sound of wind moving through grass that has nowhere else to be either. Here's a question nobody really asks about ancient humans. Not how did they survive, not what did they eat, not how did they make fire. Those get asked constantly. What about the hours in between? What did a person actually do in 50,000 BC once the surviving part of the day was finished and there was nothing left to fill the space? Did they just sit there? Did they lose their minds a little? Did some prehistoric man look up at an empty sky one afternoon and think, in whatever version of language he had, that he was profoundly, existentially bored? The answer to that last one is almost certainly yes. And here's the thing nobody tells you about what happened next. It's a much bigger part of who we became than you'd expect. First, the obvious question. Could ancient humans even feel boredom in the way we mean it? Or is that a modern invention, something that only shows up once you've built enough comfort into your life that you run out of real problems? That assumption doesn't hold up. Boredom isn't a luxury. It's a biological signal, generated by the same systems that generate hunger and pain. It's your nervous system flagging understimulation and pushing you to go find something more useful to do with yourself. That signal isn't a 21st century glitch, it's ancient. Researchers who study the Hadza of Tanzania, one of the last populations still living something close to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, and about as close a window as we have into how ancient humans actually spent their days, document boredom directly. The Hadza get bored. They have language for it. They complain about it exactly the way you would. If the Hadza get bored, humans 50,000 years ago got bored too. The feeling is as old as we are. What changed is what people did about it. And here's something that should sting a little. Studies of hunter-gatherer societies consistently find people spending roughly 3 to 5 hours a day on anything resembling work, hunting, gathering, tool maintenance, shelter repair. The rest of the day, anthropologists have a real term for leisure time. Anthropologist Marshall Sahlins looked at exactly this pattern back in the 1960s and reached a conclusion that sounds like a joke, but genuinely isn't. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society, not because they owned much of anything, but because they had an enormous surplus of the one resource modern life keeps running short on: time. We've built more labor-saving technology than any civilization in history, work 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and still feel behind. They had sharpened rocks and animal hide and somehow came out ahead on free time. So what did people actually do with all? The single most consistent answer across essentially every hunter-gatherer society ever studied is simple. They talked. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar, the researcher behind the famous idea that humans can only maintain roughly 150 stable relationships at once, spent years analyzing conversation patterns across cultures and found that around 65% of everyday human talk is essentially social gossip, not planning, not information exchange, just people discussing other people. Dunbar's argument goes further than that too. Language itself, he suggests, may have partly evolved as a replacement for physical grooming. Primates bond by picking through each other's fur, one animal at a time. Language let early humans maintain social bonds across an entire group at once, simultaneously, without ever touching anyone. But at night, around the fire, that same talking shifted into something else entirely. Researchers studying the Kalahari Sand People have documented storytelling sessions that ran for hours after dark. Myths, accounts of ancestors, explanations for the stars, and why the world worked the way it did. That's not a coincidence, and it isn't just entertainment either. Researchers studying the function of storytelling in hunter-gatherer groups have found that better storytellers, people who could hold attention and land a point, were tied to groups with measurably higher cooperation and better coordinated hunts. Being good around the fire wasn't just popular, it was survival-level valuable. What became Netflix started as social infrastructure that kept people alive. Now here's where it gets interesting. Talking wasn't the only thing filling that empty time. People made things too, and not things anyone needed. The oldest known example of deliberate mark-making is a zigzag pattern scratched into a freshwater shell found in Java, dated somewhere between 430,000 and 540,000 years old. Made not even by our species, but by Homo erectus, an earlier, smaller-brained ancestor who, by most assumptions, wasn't supposed to be doing anything like this. It didn't help him hunt. It didn't keep him warm. He just looked at a shell and decided it needed a pattern on it. Tens of thousands of years later, that same restlessness shows up on a much larger scale. Starting around 40,000 years ago, cave walls across Europe suddenly fill with paintings, horses, bison, handprints, geometric shapes rendered in ochre and charcoal, deep inside caves where no daylight ever reached. Someone carried fire into total darkness specifically to make something beautiful that almost no one would ever see. Around that same period, small carved Venus figurines start appearing across the continent, from France to Siberia, made by people who never met each other and yet landed on strikingly similar forms. None of that was functional. That's the wild part. It was made because someone had time, and something in them needed to make a thing, so they made a thing. That same restless precision even shows up in tools that didn't need it. Many stone blades from this period are worked to a symmetry and fineness that goes well beyond what their function required. Sometimes fine enough to make the tool more fragile, not more useful. Somebody, somewhere, cared about craftsmanship for its own sake, tens of thousands of years before that idea had a name. And then there's an object that might be the strangest evidence of all. The Ishango bone, found in what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and dated to somewhere between 18,000 and 25,000 years ago, is a baboon fibula carved with deliberate, grouped notches. Some researchers who've studied it believe the pattern may track lunar phases across a month. Someone with nothing urgent demanding their attention sat down and started counting, then kept counting, then organized the counts into groups, then possibly noticed those groups lined up with something happening in the sky. Nobody assigned that task. It came from raw, unstructured curiosity, the same impulse that eventually built mathematics, astronomy, and everything downstream of them. Boredom, looked at this way, might be one of the most productive forces in human history. Denied any obvious task, the brain simply starts inventing its own. That restlessness didn't stay indoors either. Studies of modern hunter-gatherers show people routinely exploring well past what's strictly necessary, walking to places they've already been just to be there, climbing a hill with no practical reason beyond the view. The human brain is wired to reward novelty. Unfamiliar places and experiences trigger a measurable dopamine response. That wiring is ancient, which means for most of human history, a bored person often just started walking, for no destination in particular. Sometimes that aimless walking found something. A river crossing nobody in the group knew about, a better shelter, a valley with more game. Evolutionary biologists describe something called the explore-exploit trade-off, the balance any group has to strike between using what it already knows and searching for what it doesn't. Groups with members who defaulted to exploring, even pointlessly, tended to be better positioned when existing resources ran thin. The person who couldn't sit still was probably a little annoying around camp. They were also, on occasion, the reason the group survived a bad season. One more piece, and it might be the most quietly important of all. Ancient humans groomed each other. Not as metaphor, but physically. Hands moving carefully through hair, tending to skin, removing whatever needed removing. That kind of contact triggers a real endorphin response in both people involved. It builds trust on a level that's difficult to replicate any other way. Sitting with someone, present, doing nothing in particular but paying close attention to them, wasn't wasted time. By any honest measure, it was one of the more intimate things two people could do with an empty afternoon. So here's the full shape of it. A person in 50,000 BC with nothing urgent left to do would talk, trade stories, maybe play some game whose rules nobody wrote down. They'd shape something beautiful that served no purpose beyond existing. They'd count notches into a bone until a pattern emerged. They'd walk somewhere new just to see it. They'd sit with someone they trusted and let the afternoon pass slowly, paying real attention. None of that sounds like suffering. It sounds like a genuinely good day. We've added an almost incomprehensible amount of stimulation since then, and somehow what we actually reach for during free time hasn't moved much at all. Connection, story, making something, going somewhere new, being near people who make us feel safe. The technology changed, the need didn't. So picture that scene again. You're in the cave, the hunting's done. There are still hours of daylight left and nothing in particular to fill them. Somebody starts scratching a pattern into a bone. Somebody else starts telling a story that gets a little taller with each retelling. Somebody sits close to a person they trust and lets the silence stretch out comfortably without needing to fill it. Nobody explained that any of it mattered. Nobody was recording it for later. It was just boredom, met the only way available, with hands, with imagination, with time that had nowhere else to go. And somehow, out of exactly that kind of empty, unremarkable afternoon, art was born, music was born, and some of the very first stories anyone ever told found their way into existence.